Okay, so once again, welcome back. And here we are in the course on environmental bioethics in the program of bioethics at St. Thomas University. I'm going to dim some of the lights here now. So students present, here we go. All right. Also, my apologies about the last minute going virtual last class, or going with a pre-recording because of the death of one of our fellow priests here in Miami. But if you have any questions about energy, you think about the flow a little bit. The first three lectures were on the matter of the planet. Geosphere was the solid matter. Then atmosphere was the gas matter, and then hydrosphere was the liquid matter, basically all in relation to life, right? Organic life, because of the uniqueness so far of our planet, of actually holding this mysterious thing we call life. Then the next lecture after that was the cycles of, we're doing cycles today. Yeah, no, wait a minute. Yeah, cycles, thank you. Yes, we did cycles, right. So cycles is dynamic, so that the matter and the energy is not static, right, but dynamic. And really, when you think about metabolism at the molecular level, it's a very dynamic system that's going on, sometimes in a fraction of a second. Lightning, for example, the thinking process that we're doing right now, the interaction between the mind and the brain is fascinating, because the brain is the actual organic organ that is between our ears inside, right, the cranium. But the mind is psychological. The mind is abstract. When I say four, everyone understands four. When I say triangle, everyone understands the figure. But where does that figure reside physically, physiologically? It actually resides on proteins that are being synthesized at a lightning speed within the cerebral cortex, within the gray matter of our brain right now. And those proteins are being generated and degenerated in fractions of seconds, right? And then some of those proteins are going to be pushed into an archive, which will make long-term memory. So that years from now, we may be able to remember at least part of this lecture, but most of the lecture is going to be gone from the active memory. It's a short-term memory. It's like when we are doing on a computer, say we're in a Word document and we forgot to save. We close the computer, we open it up again. Well, now there's a system to rescue that. But basically, in the older systems, you close the computer, forgot to save, you lost whatever work had been done, right? That's short-term memory. Typically it's estimated an average, here's an average, going into the probabilistic world right now, about 20 minutes, more or less, on average. Short-term memory. What does that mean? That means that some people have 19 minutes of short-term memory. Some other have 21 minutes, etc., to make the average, right? But it's a very robust average. If we don't recall that thought within 20 minutes, the mind will ditch it, because it's just too many proteins that are accumulating too much information. It's a whole thing. What is that? TMI. You've heard of TMI? Too much information. Media is totally constantly throwing information at us. The advertisement industry. So what do? The mind, naturally, subconsciously, is ditching all that jazz, all that noise that we're getting bombarded all the time. Okay. So to push short-term memory into long-term, we need to recall it. This is a study technique to recall. For example, to recall the lecture immediately after the lecture is the best way to push it into long-term memory. So when the exam comes, you can recall that. You can bring it back. All right. So that's just a little aside on memory. How do we remember stuff? Or stuff that impacted us very greatly, we still remember it from our childhood. But very few things do we remember from our childhood. We remember every minute of every hour of every year of our childhood. It'd be insane. Some people have that capacity. Most of us don't. And that's a good thing. Otherwise, it'd be overwhelming. But anyway, so that's about the dynamics of what's occurring. Just one little tiny example. Imagine all the metabolism that is occurring in the trillions of cells in our body, right? The overall is that we're alive here and now. Okay, so that was the cycles, and we just barely touched the surface of it, as you can see. Then energy is the one that he had to do from the pre-recorded lecture, because so far we've been looking at matter, but we need to look at energy. And the big difference about energy, whatever type of energy, whether it's chemical or light energy or electrical energy, etc., or heat energy, right, is that there's a flow of energy. Matter is cycled and transformed, right, but stays within the system. The system globally is planet Earth. The crust of planet Earth, that's basically the system when we look at life, right? Animals die in the forest, plants die, they decompose, they become part of detritus, and then the nutrients are reabsorbed by other plants, which are eaten by animals, and there's a cycle of matter, material. But energy flows through the system. For example, the biggest source of energy in our system, in our Earth, that is keeping us alive, that is keeping life on Earth, is an external energy, the original source. And what is that energy source? Hint, huge, humongous. And we have it during daytime and we don't have it at night. Light, sunlight, right? Sunlight. Imagine that. So the original source of energy for life on Earth is external. Comes from not even another planet, from a star, which we call sun. And that star, by the way, that star, how old is that star? As old as our planet. 4.5 billion. A few little numbers that you can toss out there to show, 4.5 billion. And so where is that in the lifetime of the universe? What's the lifetime of the universe so far, approximately? 13. So I'll give you a hint. It's 3 times. It's about 3 times. So we have come into existence, like most galaxies have come into existence. No, no cheating. Just numbers out there to impress the people that you know stuff. So we established that the life of our solar system so far is about 4.5 billion, which is approximately the lifetime of our galaxy system and all the other galaxies. Approximately, you can round it up to about 4.5, and it's the last third. So here's a statistical for you. It's the last third of the lifetime of the universe. Last third. What does that mean? So we multiply 4 times 3, which is 12. Yeah. Third, but we have 4.5, right? 13.8. 13.8. So you can round it up to about 14 billion. 14 billion, right? That's why I say to talk about 15 billion years ago is nonsense, because time did not exist then. We didn't exist. The universe didn't exist. The Big Bang were 1 billion years before the Big Bang, which is nonsense talking philosophically, because time and place, time and space are linked. Remember the amalgam, another one of Einstein's contribution. Time and space move together, right? In fact, in physics today, they talk about time/space together. So anyway, okay, so you see how it has some application and relevance. Anyway, the energy flows through the system, and it's converted, it's transformed. Okay? So let's say the input of energy on planet Earth, which is relevant for life, right, is what we said? Light energy from specifically the sun. Oh yes, that's the other point. 4.5 billion years. It's the sun's age, it's our age of the planet, and it's considered, it has been estimated, this is a model, probabilistic, there we go, automatically into probability, that the sun is middle age right now, is halfway, because it's what is physically, physiologically, what is the sun? Solid, liquid, or gas? First. You can go through it. If we had a rocket that was fast enough and shielded enough, we could go right through the sun. Ball of gas. Exactly. It's a ball of gas and wet gas, mostly highly flammable, goes up in flame. It's a very tiny percentage of our atmosphere, thanks be to God. Hydrogen, exactly. The simplest element. So you can see that that ball of gas tapped into the first element that was formed, which is hydrogen, which is the simplest one proton, one electron, right, on the periodic table, and some helium, which is also flammable. No, helium is inert, but it's mostly hydrogen, gas, burning. So what's going to happen? At some point, it's going to burn out. Yes. Well, it's a double thing. When that's the lifetime of a star. Remember, first it implodes when it burns, and then when it implodes, the intensity is so high and the gravity that then it explodes and dissipates. Right? So there's the implosion and then the explosion, and that would be the end of the sun, which would be the end of the solar of the Earth and the planetary system.
The gravity of the sun with the planets on the orbit.
Yes, imagine that.
So then
This gas,
would it
this.
just fall out? Would everything just fall out of place?
Well, yeah, it will go. Yeah, we lose the centripetal force, the pulling in force, and the centrifugal will fly us out. Yeah. But probably way before that, that change in the gradual loss of light from the sun will probably kill the Earth. You know, we not get enough light to. I'm just speculating, really, but it will have drastic effects. But the sun, basically, my point about that is that the sun is about halfway through its lifetime. It's estimated. The astrophysicists, that's what they tell us. So we can expect the sun to end, to die, the death of a star, and with it, the whole planetary system, including planet Earth, the 4 inner planets, the 4 outer planets, and all that, in another 4.5 billion years. Right? Hopefully we'll see it from upstairs somewhere. I will just watch the show in full splendor. Okay? All right, so you see, we go into probability kind of automatically like that in science. And again, in science, you know, we're obsessed by numbers. So that was then that light energy is transformed. And what's the output energy? That again goes out of our system. Considering that our system, at least for matter's sake, our system is kind of closed. But for energy's sake, our system, meaning the Earth, is not closed. It's an open system, meaning that stuff goes through it. What is the output? Do we output light? Well, some, otherwise we wouldn't be able to take a photograph from space of Earth, right? You've seen those pictures of planet Earth from space, of photographs from the satellites? That is possible. Why? Because it's light that is reflecting from Earth, and it's mostly blue and some green and brown and so forth, and then the white of the clouds. So that is light that is being reflected. And that's how we can see each other, because of the reflection. The light that is absorbed, we can't see because it's absorbed. So we do reflect some light, but most of what we give off in the energy transformation, hint, is energy unavailable for work. When you hear unavailable for work, you have to think of, no, that's available for work. That's precisely available for work. Potential energy is a battery that has not been used. Methane, you said?
No, I said
Well, kinetic is dynamic. Kinetic is the thinking process that we're doing right now, the burning of the ATPs. burning. What happens with burning? What's the energy that becomes unavailable for work? Heat. Exactly, heat energy. It diffuses into the universe. Big, huge word for it. Entropy. Entropy increases. So there's a gradual increase in entropy. You know, the sun is not just lighting us, the sun is lighting everything around it. It's called radiation. It goes out and never to come back. All right. So it's a net increases entropy, right? Which is energy unavailable for work. And so basically the universe is becoming cooler and cooler as it expands also. So these are, you can also go into philosophy and theology about it, but this is the physical reality. So we have this light energy, then is transformed into mostly chemical energy by photosynthesis. And that's the chemical energy that we use in cellular respiration for metabolism, for staying alive, right? And that's what the beauty of that, the word, for lack of another one, is the elegance. The elegance of all the chemical reactions, the millions of chemical reactions that occur on planet Earth. two chemical reactions have a perfect balance. Two chemical reactions that keep life alive on Earth. What are those two chemical reactions? Hint, it's a redox reaction.
It's photosynthesis
Yes, and
and metabolism.
well, metabolism, what specifically metabolism? Which
Mm.
metabolism? Involves oxygen. Respiration, burning, cellular respiration. In each one of the trillions of our cells, cellular respiration, burning glucose. We're burning glucose right now, but in a controlled reaction. That's why we don't go up in flames. We're burning glucose right now, lots of it, and we're giving off heat, right? And we're exhaling CO2, which the plants take and make glucose out of it again. So it's elegant. Think about it. Just two chemical reactions that are totally complementary to each other maintain life on Earth. Right? Super duper. Okay, so it's exciting. Now, we're going to go into succession and climax communities and then human population growth because of all the, so there's a thing called the carrying capacity, okay? The carrying capacity is the number of individual that can be maintained in any geographical region. It could be the number of individual bacteria on the tip of a pin, or it could be the number of giraffes in the African savanna, or it could be the number of humans on planet Earth. And every species has a carrying capacity. Below that carrying capacity, which is a number, an absolute number, 5, 100, 25,000 million, you know, it's a specific number and it's an absolute number. It's unitless, it's number of individuals, right? So if we are below the carrying capacity, there's still room for more of whatever species. If we're above the carrying capacity, we're overcrowded. And in nature has a way of taking care of that, which is natural selection. On average, if we go into probability, who will die? The weaker, the less fit. So it's about fitness, right? Which is not just exercise, muscle, but fitness. Has the genes for resisting drought. For example, the pine trees here. Some have genes for resisting drought, some don't. So when we go into the dry season, less rain, the weaker, the less fit. There's no muscle in trees. The less fit are the ones who don't have the gene or the genes for drought don't express well or don't express at all. Those will dry out and they'll be right next to another little baby pine that is totally green. The assumption is that the green pine has genes that are drought resistant, which translates into actual proteins that make metabolism more efficient, more water efficient, okay? So you can always reduce it down to some kind of metabolic process, a pathway. Okay, so we know, we can figure out pretty much the carrying capacity on just about every other species that we've seen, again, from bacteria and fungi all the way up to the sperm whale, which is the largest animal on Earth, all right? Except for the human. We don't know what the carrying capacity for the human is, because of an added thing that we have that other organisms don't have. Plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. No other organism has. Give you a hint. Cell phone. Technology. So technology puts us.
We can move from one place to another.
Not only move, right now inside this classroom,
travel.
all of you, we're not moving, but we're inside a controlled environment. If I were doing this lecture out there, we'd be sweating bullets already. And Professor, I've had enough of you. Goodbye, because I'm sweating bullets. But we are in an artificial environment here. What if it's pouring rain like it has been out there? You know, we're dry. So technology has put us above and beyond any other species on the planet, even outside the planet, because now we are circling Earth, the International Space Station. There's a project, or two projects right now, which were actually started by the W administration, George W. Bush, son of Bush Sr., And the two big projects are to colonize the moon, to put a permanent colony of human beings on the moon. It's not going to be thousands of people, going to be a few individuals to colonize the moon and to eventually put people on Mars. Right?
I went to NASA this summer.
Yeah.
twice.
NASA, you went?
Yeah.
Which,
twice.
which one? To Kennedy or?
Kennedy.
Oh, yes, the Space
And
Center.
they
That's the
showed-
launching.
yeah, they showed us,
Huh?
like the machine that they had on Mars and,
Already,
Yeah.
the rovers.
yeah, the rovers that were there, and I think that, I think only like a few persons were there, but they don't.
No, not on Mars. We don't have a person on Mars yet.
Oh, it's
No,
not Mars.
the moon, yes, we have there are people on the moon or not. We have been on the moon. Remember Neil Armstrong putting his foot on the moon? I remember that in 1970s. 1960s. I was watching that on TV as a teenager. But yeah, no manned mission to Mars yet, but they're working on it. And it's exciting stuff. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. So we're going to look at succession in nature, and then we're going to go begin to scratch the surface about human population. All right, and we'll go more deeply into it next Saturday, which I hope you're all here because I'm getting evaluated by our dean, etc. Okay, so natural succession, there are, like the word succession says, there are different stages. Okay, and there are basically three stages. The first stage is a pioneer stage. Then we have intermediate species. And finally, we come up to what is known as a climax community. You see what that means, climax community. And there will always be one or two dominant species in the climax community. Typically, it will be the largest plant or animal. On the plant side, it's generally the most abundant tree. On the animal side, it's on opposite is typically smaller individuals because they are the top carnivores, as we saw on the food pyramid. All right. But then for human population, we're going to use the human population to look at, growth curves and what we mean by the carrying capacity. And then we're going to get into the United Nations Global Development Goals, which were started in the year 2000 as a benchmark and so on and so forth. So let's continue without further ado. Let's look at succession in nature. I hope you can see a progression here from the first thing that impacts us, very tiny, small little plants like lichens and mosses, to shrubs and herbs and grasses and weeds, finally to large trees. And there's a succession, there's a progression here, even physically by size, from small little plants to large, the largest plants, which are trees. All right. So starting with these species that are called pioneers, they're called pioneers for a reason. The reason is that they go into an area that is originally barren of life. It could be sandy, it could be rocky, it could be soily, muddy. You can think of the same in the water. It could be a lake or the ocean. Originally, there's no life there, but there's a medium, either a solid medium like the surface of the earth, or a liquid medium like the ocean or a lake. And it gets colonized, precisely. It gets colonized by pioneers, pioneer species. These pioneer species, in general, they tend to be hardy. And because they are the first ones to arrive and settle in, they have to make do with very little. Typically, it could be on land, it could be little water, it could be little soil. You know, those are the two main ones. It could be little light also if it's covered. But they get established, they get a foothold. All right. Lichens in particular are very interesting. Let me pull up lichens here, because lichens is what we call a symbiotic relationship. And interesting because lichen is a combination, many different colors of lichen, but what gives lichen its color, it's mostly algae that live within it, because a lichen is a combination of fungi and algae, which is interesting because one is an autotroph and the other one is a heterotroph. Now, autotroph means that they produce their own food, right? Between the algae and the fungi, which is the autotroph, the food producing, which one photosynthesizes, the algae or the fungus? The algae photosynthesize, right? That's why they're different colors. It's the chlorophyll in them. So the algae, some are green algae, some are brown algae, some are red algae, remember? Okay. So algae photosynthesize, they are autotrophs, but they require a liquid environment. So either the oceans or the lakes or the rivers or the ponds and streams, etc. So algae requires a liquid environment to live in. And they photosynthesize, they're autotrophs, so they make their own food. Fungi, then, do fungi make their own food?
They eat it.
They eat
They-
it, exactly.
they-
There's,
They're
exactly.
like like this.
Yeah, decomposers, right? So fungi are heterotrophs, and they're called saprophytes. In other words, sapro, death. They love dead stuff, carcass. And it's a good thing that we have fungi and bacteria because they eat up decomposing animals and plants, and they turn those animals and plants into nutrients. And in the process, they get nourishment out of it, all right? So fungi and bacteria are very important and necessary in the ecosystem, precisely to recycle organic material. Organic material, basically dead plants, animals, and also dead fungi and dead bacteria, because they die too, and they have to be decomposed and eaten up by other fungi and bacteria. So bottom line is that fungi are heterotrophs, they're saprophytes, they're decomposers, right? They feed on dead organic material, but they're generally kind of transparent. But they do have a lot of water inside, so they provide a liquid environment. And these algae have adapted to live inside the fungus, similar to the other little creatures that live inside the coral. Corals, which are animals, they're little polyps, right, are generally transparent. But we can see the corals, which are typically a tan, brownish color, because they have little animals, they're called zooxanthellae. They have little microorganisms that live inside, all right? And that's part of what happens. The coral bleaching is because when it gets too hot for the corals, they spit out the zooxanthellae, they reject them. They're upset, and so they shoot them out, and they become transparent, and so that's what we call coral bleaching. We're looking then at what is left, which is the shell, which is calcium carbonate, sandy whitish color, all right? Anyway, back to lichens. Lichen is a combination, it's what we call a symbiotic relationship. The algae obviously is providing what for the fungus? Algae is autotroph, is producing food.
Food.
Yeah, it's producing an excess of food, so the fungus is getting fed by the algae. And what does the fungus provide in return to the algae? Lodging, a place in which to live. So in the middle of a sandy area or a rocky area, you got lichens where algae would normally have no water because it's just a rock or a piece of sand, or typically rocks, or it could be a bark of a tree. So the fungus provides a place for the algae to live that is a water environment, a liquid environment inside. And so the algae is happy, the fungus is happy, and they live happily together. Okay. Now, in addition to that, what happens is typically the fungus or the lichens, they also produce an acid as a byproduct. It's their waste, it's their pee, all right? They produce acid. And the acid, what does the acid do to the rock? The acid eats up the rock.
So it makes it
Yeah,
break it or
yeah, it breaks it down into minerals, And so what happens is, the long and the short is that, right? Here's a lizard on top of a lichen on top of a rock. The lichen is digesting, well, but the acid output is eroding the rock and is mineralizing it, is turning it into little microscopic minerals, which then will leach the way into the soil. So the bottom line about lichens is that they're weathering rock into soil. Okay. And so lichens are pioneers. They get established into an area, or it could be a bark or something like that, and they are producing soil in the process. Okay, so that's why they're considered pioneers. Mosses also, mosses are small and they also have an erosion effect. And the bottom line is that when these individual clumps start dying, because they're going to die sooner or later, right? Then they get decomposed by other bacteria and by other lichens and by other mosses, by other fungi. And so they become also nutrients for future plants to establish in there. When we take that picture overall, what happens is when the pioneer species, the individuals start dying and decomposing and becoming nutrients, basically we're producing soil. They're producing soil, all right? So that allows other plants to come in to the area. And they're gonna be, originally, they're gonna be small plants, weeds, herbs, grasses, shrubs, smaller. When those individuals start dying, of course, then more soil accumulates. And it's an increasing process. It's increasing. So the soil content, what we call the topsoil, is increasing gradually. Eventually, there's enough soil buildup where you can have larger plants. And what are the larger plants? The trees that have come in. First, they're going to be small trees, then they're going to be larger trees. And eventually, some of the largest trees will come in. The larger species that need more soil and so forth. And so that's going to be the dominant species. The dominant species, we're focusing on trees here, on plants. The dominant species is going to be, generally in a forest, it's going to be the largest tree by number and by size. Larger number of individuals and larger size. That's why they dominate the forest. And typically it's only one or two species. The example that I always give is our forest here at St. Thomas University, which is a pine forest / pine, like these, but even more massive and thicker than these because we have a lot of sandy soil here. And for the sandy soil, the root system is unencumbered. So the root system grows massively, and therefore the shoot, which is above any plant, has two parts: the root system, which is in the ground, and the shoot, which is above ground. The shoot system of the pine trees become huge, humongous here. Most of our trees, of our pine trees here, for those of you who are online, it takes two people to go around the trunk. Some of you who are present have worked in the forest before, they can attest to that. It takes two people to go around that trunk. For some trees in here, it takes 3 people to go around the trunk. It's just amazing. We call them majestic because they're just gorgeous, huge pine trees. Okay. Anyway, that's an example of a dominant species. When a dominant species establishes in an area, it's called a climax community. Climax community. All right. And so there will be no more succession in a climax community. There will be no more succession going from lichens through shrubs into trees, because basically the ecosystem now has reached its carrying capacity. All of the plants and the animals and the fungi and the bacteria that live in there, more or less, have reached their carrying capacity, especially the dominant species of trees, all right? In other words, that's the maximum number of / pine that these 15 acres can hold. And it's going to be determined of, obviously, on trees, what's one of the main resources that a tree needs. Any plant, 2 main resources from the environment.
Light and water.
Exactly, light and water, right? Sunlight and rainwater in nature. Those are the abiotic factors. So once the canopy becomes dense and photograph a satellite photo or a drone photo of the forest from the top, you see all canopy, dense coverage. Then that's a climax community because there's no more room for the big guys. And then underneath you actually have 3 layers in any forest structurally. On the shoot system, you have the canopy from the top, right, formed by the dominant species. I'm going to go all the way down to the ground. The ground is the ground cover. Ground cover will be weeds, shrubs, herbs, grasses, ground cover. And then the middle is called the understory. Single word, understory. Understory is the middle, which is under the canopy. And those will be smaller trees and large shrubs, palms also, all right? So the tallest shrubs and the shorter trees and the palms will be in the middle, called the understory. And typically they are shady plants, because most of the light is being taken up by the canopy, by the big trees, by the dominant species. They'll get some rainwater coming through, but not much. Most of the rainwater is going to be actually from the ground. They don't need, leaves don't need water. It's the root system that needs water, right? So it's the ecosystem below ground that absorbs the liquid water. And it's the ecosystem above ground that absorbs the sunlight for photosynthesis. We need both for, okay, so you get the picture about succession here. And there's a gradual movement in nature when left alone, going from pioneer species colonizing. So we leave an area alone on Earth, generally it will go through this process. Pioneer species moving into a barren area, colonizing it, they start dying, making up soil, then other shrubs and herbs and weeds will move in. When they die, they make more soil, and eventually the trees will come in, little by little, until we get to the largest trees, which will be the dominant species, and form a climax community. At that point, there's no more succession going on, but there is replacement. Because individuals within the climax community, individuals will die. They will die. They have a lifespan. Every organism on Earth has a lifespan. What is the lifespan of the human, approximately?
Today, maybe 85?
About 80 years, average. 81 for women, 78 for men, on average. Then we have to go country by country, because that very much tied in with healthcare available, right? So when there is good healthcare available in generally like what we call the developed world or the Northwestern Hemisphere, North America and Europe in general, when there's good healthcare, we see that people last an average of about 80 years. Of course, the average, you see, here's where that average is kind of a lie. The average lifespan for human, because humans are not, aside from the fact that we're not a number, we're not a statistic, right? But we're either male or female genetically, from the time of conception. And so the real average lifetime, well, Professor, you're talking about a man or a woman, because for a man, it's going to be about 78, a woman's going to be about 81 right now in the States, which is kind of what the body can bear, okay? In other words, at an average of that age, we start getting systemic shutdown. The organ systems of the body start aging and dying. When you go into vital organs, as we saw in the course on the end of life, and you'll see it going forward, the vital organs start dying irreversibly. So that the death process has begun. It may be subtle, but when vital organs start dying irreversibly, the death process has begun. Okay, so every species, regardless of what species it is, has a particular lifespan. Some species are very short lifespan, like bacteria, maybe only a few hours. And some species have a long lifespan, like the tortoise, the Galapagos turtle, maybe 400 to 500 years. It's amazing. Maybe not that long. But anyway, some have a very long lifespan. Our pine trees, for example, here is an average lifespan between 150 to 200 years, approximate. It's a range, right? It's a broad. So we can say maybe 175 years would be kind of the middle. It's the average lifespan. So the individuals die. When they die, they fall to the ground, they get rotten and become soil. And then new individuals come up, the baby pines come up, right? Baby plants come up. So there's replacement, but there's no more succession. In other words, the dominant species stays dominant as long as, what happens? As long as,
They die,
no,
or as long as they have the light and the water.
exactly. So exactly, translate that into, so now we're going into abiotic factors, non-biotic factors, because the biotic factors are dependent on the abiotic factors. But the abiotic factors are not dependent on the biotic factors. In other words, does it matter how many bacteria we have if we have light or rain? No, life does not impact the non-living factors significantly. Some a little bit, I'll tell you how a little bit, mostly by humidity, okay? But it's the other way around. The non-biotic factors, the abiotic factors impact biotic factors, life, right? So the amount of rain, the amount of light, sunlight. Now we're talking about on a daily basis, on a weekly, monthly basis, up to a year basis, we're talking about hydrosphere,
Cycles.
weather,
Oh.
weather, seasons, right? Weather. When we expand that, but weather will change from year to year. One year we had a dry season, the other year we had a wet season. We need to translate weather into long term, which is
Climate change.
Climate.
Climate
Bingo,
change.
bingo, that's it, climate. As long as there is no climate change, a climax community will stay the same. That's what we call homeostasis, steady state, right? Individuals will die, new individuals will be born and come up and replace, but that's replacement, that's not succession. When there is climate change, then we can expect
A new
more or
species.
less dramatic things, more or less dramatic. It can go, depending on how much the climate change is, how dramatic it's going to be. If we go from a tropicalization to a winterization, that's pretty dramatic. Many species will die. That's what we call a mass extinction. But after a mass extinction, when conditions become favorable for life again, in other words, liquid water becomes available again, back from a winterization, from an ice age into a tropicalization, toward a tropicalization, now we get a flourishing of species. That's what we call an expansive radiation, an expansive radiation. Remember your fundamental course in the very beginning? An expansive. So after mass extinction, the wiping out of the dinosaurs, guess what? There was a flourishing of diversity of mammals, because now we're not going to get eaten. So those are big cycles, long-term cycles that are affected not by weather, but by climate. And that has the capacity and the potential for changing, and replacing dominant species with other dominant species. We're going toward a winterization. The dominant species will tend to be conifers because they're more adapted to cold weather. Needles instead of leaves, cones instead of flowers, etc. Resin instead of sap. But if we're going from a winterization to a tropicalization, deciduous trees and warm weather trees and plants will be favorable, like a tropical rainforest, a jungle. Palms and tropical trees like the banyan trees, there's much more diversity of tropical trees. So the greatest diversity we find on Earth is precisely in the tropical rainforest. Least diversity is in the tundra, the taiga, the cold regions. Fewer species are adapted to harsh cold. And it has to do, at the end of the day, with metabolism, with an environment, an external environment that is benevolent to an internal environment, because the internal environment tends to be on the warm side for having the metabolic reactions that are needed for sustaining life. All right, let me move to slide. This is just a graphic representation. We go from the small plants into shrubs, larger plants, smaller trees, larger trees. When we get to the climax community, we have a few tallest trees breaking through up top of the canopy, getting old, losing branches, etc. You know, and there's replacement of individuals here, but basically it's stable, okay? When the climate is stable. So when we talk about climate change, that's the big unknown. How is it going to change for the better or for the worse? It depends. It can also be regional, all right? But we can expect with drastic climate change, drastic change in the biota, in the things that are keeping us alive, the other plants and animals. All right. Here is an example of St. Thomas University, which is kind of a square, 5 blocks by 5 blocks. Here is our forest. It's a little deceiving here. I can tell that this is about 15 acres. The whole campus is about 140 acres. So again, mentally 15, 140, round up, either 40 and 140 or 15 and 150, more or less round up mentally. It's about what percentage? What is 15 out of 140? Use either 14 or 150. What percentage? If it's, what's 14 out of 140? What percentage? 10%, 10%.
Like 15%, 15%.
Closer to 10, closer to 10. Let's say if it's 140 and it's 14, 14 is 10% of 140, right? You're just adding a zero. Okay, so we have about 10%. My point is that we have about 10% left. 60 years ago, before the university started, all the land was undeveloped. 100 years ago, going back to Miami Gardens where we live, all of Miami Gardens was undeveloped. All of Miami was undeveloped. And it was a slash pine forest. The whole county, the whole South Florida was a slash pine forest because it was a dominant species. And here is one photo of a slash pine, huge, with the scale, the human scale is down here. So this is about 8 to 10 stories high, okay? The human is over here, more or less. Huge, humongous, beautiful trees. We have about 10% left. We're trying to preserve it, okay, by all means, because already the other 90%, one way or another, is developed. Yes, this area, this is a science building, by the way. This is where we are. We are around here right now, inside the building, the science building. There's a parking lot. And this area also has, it's kind of natural on the sides, on the two edges, the two corners, but you can see underneath is lawn, So we still have the pine trees in this corner and in this corner, the northeast and the northwest corner, but there's lawn underneath. That's what we call manicured. It's not an ecosystem. Basically, we only have two species. We have in the manicured area, we have the pine trees, and then we have grass, lawn underneath, which the lawnmower comes through all the time. So it's not an ecosystem. It's not a complex ecosystem with an understory and plants and animals living in there. We got foxes, we got raccoons, we got all kinds of hawks coming in, not to mention the myriads of insects and small little plants and stuff that we have in there. Okay, so this is a whole ecosystem, complex web that we saw earlier in the course, right? All right, so we're trying to preserve this guy, but I'm going to use it just for the purpose of the size itself to go into population and to human population density. All right, now let's look at the concept of and the reality of the carrying capacity. What is the carrying capacity? All right, so that has to do with population growth. And the typical population growth curve is this growth curve that looks like an S. If you take an S and pull it out from the two ends, you know, stretch out an S letter, doesn't matter if it's uppercase or lowercase, but pull it out by the two ends and you get this kind of curve. This is called a logistic growth curve or a natural population growth curve, all right? It starts at 0, then 1, and it kind of follows a geometric pattern. First is a slow growth, if we do it geometrically, a doubling of the population, geometric, right? Is X squared. So we start with one individual, let's say with asexual reproduction. So we split the bacterium in half, or we split the fungus in half. How many fungi do we get? Two. Each one of those two daughters, we split them in half. Two more, so that's 4. And then each one of those 4, we split them in half, 8. So you notice it's what we call a geometric progression. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. In 8 divisions, I'm already up to 128. In 8 divisions. That is different from a linear progression. A linear progression is just arithmetic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in 8 progressions linear, I just have 8 individuals. But if I do it geometrically, doubling the population each time, which is a typical growth, right, in nature, I have 128 in just 4 divisions. In 8 divisions. In 9 divisions, I have double 128, and I'm stretching my mind. It's going to be 250, 250 would be 500, right? So it's just a little under 500. It's 480 something. 496, actually, because 8 times 2 is 16. So it's 496 in 9. In 10, let's take it to 10. 496 times 2. So 500 times 2 is 1,000 minus 4, right? 1,000 minus 4, 996, right? How can it be? No, it has to be minus 8. It's 4 and 4. So 492. In 10 divisions and geometric progression, I have 992 individuals, almost 1,000 individuals. Started with 1. Just duplicating geometric progression. Okay. So that's the typical growth curve in nature of whatever species. So first it starts slowly. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, you know, it took 4 divisions to get out of the units and so forth. So this slow beginning is called a lag phase, L-A-G. It's lagging, it's going slowly, but it's going to pick up speed. With time, it's going to pick up speed. And then it goes into a log phase or exponential. So from lag to log, speeding up fast, very fast. But then it's going to plateau, it's going to level off at the top. And this phase is called stationary. All right. Let me go to the next graph, which is where I put, so that's stationary, that's the carrying capacity. And what, well, I just gave it off. What limits, why does it go to stationary? Why does it not continue exponentially, you know?
Because the natural resources that they are needed for them to continue are beginning to die out or erode or finish.
Used up, exactly. So basically food runs out. In the case of plants, it's going to be nutrients and sunlight and rain. In the case of animals, it's going to be basically food, but also space, right? Which is related to the food. So yes, and that's where when it limits itself is because of the limited resources that are available. Now, those resources, some are abiotic, like sunlight and rain or soil, and some are biotic, like the number of rabbits available in the field for the fox to eat, right? And so forth. So the resources are always limited in nature, and that's what established the carrying capacity. And that's the number, the specific number. How many foxes can live in our forest? Probably just one family of foxes. You know, which is really... Hey? There's a baby fox. You've seen it? Yeah, we've actually seen there is an actual baby fox. I even have a photograph of a fox pair, a couple that was going through the back of our building here several summers ago. I saw it, and it was, you can see the difference. It was a male following the female. The female was going along and leaving her scent behind, and then the male was going around smelling the scent to see when she was ovulating, so they could mount and have the puppies. It was very beautiful. They were walking around the middle of campus here, and I photographed them. So yeah, we have foxes. It's exciting. We have raccoons also. Those are kind of the top carnivores, right? We have a lot of lizards, a lot of insects, snakes. None are poisonous. We've seen the snakes. We've caught the snakes and so forth. So it's exciting.
Iguanas.
We got a lot of iguanas are invasive. Yes, we have them, and they're invasive, and they're eating up the flowers all over the place. Yep. So that's the carrying capacity. Okay, this is a critical number. To know the carrying capacity of a species naturally, you know, how many trees it holds and so on and so forth. And this is the work of ecology. This is what population biology and ecology. Let's look at some examples. Okay, it's the maximum number of individuals within of a species, individuals of a species within a stable population. So for example, here, starting with the grass, you can see at least, I hope that you can see at least 3 species of grass here. There's this green blade grass, right? Then there is this other grass that is kind of tall, or maybe it's a shrub, a weed. It's a weed, it's not a grass. It's a weed that is tall. And then there's this other one that is smaller with the little little yellow flowers. So we can see at least 3, and I'm sure there are many other species, different species of weeds in here. Each weed will have a carrying capacity, and they'll compete. In here, in this plot, which is an urban area, obviously there's a building. What's one of the main limiting factors for these weeds to grow here? The physical space.
Soil.
The soil, yeah, the physical space, you know, when they run into a boundary, we cannot see this on the top, but we actually have 2 ecosystems going on, above ground and below ground. And I can tell you by far, the below ground ecosystem is far more complex than what we see. So what we don't see here, but it's going on, I can tell you, between this grass and these little weeds that have the yellow flowers, underneath the root system are putting out chemicals to establish their territory. And those chemicals are competing with each other. The grass is trying to move into this area. The yellow flower weed is trying to move into this area. And so the root systems of each species is having a biochemical fight down there to establish their territory. Okay? And it's highly sophisticated. It's down to the chemical level, to the biochemical level. And it's going on, it's very real in every part of the world where there are plants. This is going on. So that establishes their territory. And we can say the carrying capacity for each one of these species is X amount of individuals per square foot or per square mile, whatever the area is. Right? For the cows, what's one of the main limiting factors here? Is going to be the amount of grass that's available. They overgrass this area, they have to be moved into another plot because they overgrassed it. They ate up all the grass that was available. Now they have to move into another area. So that's this area per square kilometer can hold so many cows, right? I talked about the bacteria on top of a pin. Once the tip of the pin is totally covered with bacteria, that's the carrying capacity, because they cannot really grow too much on top of each other because they're putting out chemicals that are trying to establish their own territories. Here, so this is one end of the scale. On the smaller scale, this, by the way, is an electron microscope micrograph that has been colorized to be able to see. So this is very tiny. It's thousands of times magnification. On the opposite end, let's take a top carnivore here. Here's the panther, which is the same as the Florida panther, is the same as the what's it out there? The mountain lion, the puma. It's basically the same species, right? Felix leopardo, is it? Felix puma. Anyway. It looks like a pair. This looks like the strong male of the lookout. This looks like female relaxing. And here's a carcass of something they brought in and ate. their territory is a good chunk of square mileage of the Grand Canyon, just for this one pair, because they need a lot of food, right? They need a lot of rabbits and everything else to hunt down to keep them alive. Remember, for 1 pound, 10 pounds of flesh, for 1 pound of body, okay? So this will be small numbers, these two individuals for a large territory. And then there'll be another pair of pumas somewhere around there in the opposite end, maintaining and defending their territory, and so forth. So each individual species, there will be a number of individuals within each species that has the carrying capacity. And that's a stable environment. When you put them all together, that is an ecosystem that is stable. Enter the human into the world. Keep in mind, we have classified so far about 2 million species on Earth. By definition, these are different species, okay? There could be Felix leo, Felix puma, Felix leopardo, Felix tigris, Felis domesticus, like the common cat. Different species of the same genus. Of the 2 million species that have been classified so far, and that's estimated to be only about 5 to 10%, there are statistics, 5 to 10% of the actual species that are living on Earth today. So we can talk about 2 million times 5 times, that's 10. 2 million times 10 is 20. So it's estimated between 10 to 20 million species living on Earth today. We have not discovered most of the species. We've only discovered 5 to 10% of the species that are on Earth. Now, every now and then you get a big news report that there was a new species of monkey discovered in the Amazons, right? But most of these species we haven't discovered yet. It's because they are what? Tiny and hiding, microscopic, like the protists, like the microscopic algae, bacteria, or plankton. Most of these microscopic species are microscopic at the bottom of the ocean. And that's why we haven't discovered them yet, but it's an estimate, right? Based on what we have discovered. Of all the millions of species that live on Earth today, we humans are the only species we cannot figure out the carrying capacity yet, right? Precisely because of technology. They're even now talking about, I say, not a week goes by without a bioethical issue. Oh, by the way, I need to send you another link to the Yanomami Indians in the Amazon, and there's now a new ethical issue with them. It came out on the BBC. I need to send you that link. That's a source. I want you to read a little article, news article on the BBC about the Yanomami in the Amazons. It's tied in one way or another to the election of the next president of Brazil. Okay, so the carrying capacity of the human, we just don't know. But we do know from the past, these are the numbers. If we start 2 to 5 million years ago, all right, and keep in mind that the human species is estimated to go back actually, so we diverge from the pan troglodytes, from the chimpanzee ancestor, about 6 million years ago, right, at the level of the genus Homo. Then species is debatable, but at the level of the genus, very slow growth. You can see this is basically the lag phase. This means that a lot of humans were dying. Now, this is Homo, this is genus, all right? Not species, but this is the Homo genus, this graph. And you see that there's a lot of death. This, by the way, is not to scale. This is because 2 to 5 million is here, and then we go into the thousands, right, in the scale. So this scale is not to scale. This would expand along the x-axis, which is the independent axis. Typically, it's time. Very slow growth. Very slow growth means we had high death rate, high mortality, infant mortality, youth mortality. We got eaten up by the animals. We got infected by bacteria. There was no healthcare going on. So we didn't survive. Survival of the fetus, very primitive, high mortality rate. All right. And because we're top mammals, we would produce few, typically one, rarely two siblings every 9 months. So that's very low birth rate. We have very low birth rate, right? 1 or 2, like about every year, more or less, of the couples that are reproducing in a primitive state, which most of them did not because they did not get to mate. For a long time, for thousands of years, until around the Middle Ages, it started shooting up. We can associate this shooting up more or less with what? One big human factor, one type of behavior that we got out of the lag phase and it went into the log phase. What was happening here? Low birth rate is still the same.
Hunting, moving, fire.
Much
No.
more than that, because these people had all that.
Okay.
These were hunter-gatherers. They had
Mm,
already harnessed the fire, thousands of years ago. But there was still, there was still a lot of death. But the technology, and one particular technology, medicine, the practice of medicine, healthcare, which began around the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, okay? In fact, look at this, that little dip there is the Black Death, which was the plague, which was the bubonic plague, the bacillus of the bubonic plague, which was an infection, bacteria that has estimated, at least in Europe, where we have more of the data, wiped out the European population several times to half, drastically. Now we have, just to put that in context, and you see how statistics are becoming useful to put things in perspective. How many people do we have in the US right now, approximately? Round it down.
300 million?
Yes, thank you very much. About 300 million. That's a lot of people. 300 million in the US alone, right? Well, of course, 8 billion in the whole world. So that's 8,000 million, all right? We're 300 out of that 8,000. Right, so imagine if within a year or two, which was the plague, took on, it wasn't even decades, it was just a few years of the bubonic plague, we will go down to 150 million, from 300 to 150. For every one of us, one will be dead, one will be alive. We have 11 in the cohort, plus myself, 12. By next month, we only have 6 left, 6 of us. Who's going to go? Flip of the coin, 50-50 chance of survival. Who's going to be here? Who's going to go? On average, the most fit. Who can survive?
Women.
Women, that's right. But remember, without us, you're only going to last one generation, right? So we have something to contribute, and the X sperm is disappearing, by the way. The X chromosome is disappearing. It's becoming smaller. It's already small, and it's disappearing. Yeah. Kind of interesting, interesting dynamics, the future of humanity. If we don't kill ourselves by technology and pollution, we kill ourselves by disappearing the male. Yep.
So if it does happen, like in the long run,
Yeah.
that the X
Chromosome.
starts to like disappear.
Yep.
What do you think that it's gonna like turn out in a case where they're going to, how they do in vitro fertilization?
Yep.
Would they kind of fabricate the X chromosome to?
It could come to a point. I mean, this is long term because we're talking geologic time for natural selection, for evolution to occur. All right. So that's another thing about technology. It has put us out of natural selection. Now we're into artificial selection. And in vitro is one of them. And we can, sadly, because that is an industry that we talk about in another course at the beginning of life, but that is taking off also. But also it's only available because it's not covered by insurance. So generally it's available. It's what we call boutique medicine. It's only available to the rich. I mean, in vitro costs several $1,000s, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 each attempt. So it's only available to a very small percentage of the population. So most of the population will be excluded. So this you see how it becomes an ethical issue. Okay. Without mentioning God, religion, or faith at all, just on the numbers of it. Okay, and access. So access, but general, bring it back, access to healthcare in general became more available. And so the population started shooting up. But also because the
Father-
more individuals, hold on, the more individuals we have, the more individuals will reproduce, and the more babies we will have, you see? So it synergizes. When we go into a geometric progression, it synergizes in itself, upon itself. But the resources also have to be there. This also correlates with agriculture, having enough food available and a clean food, you know, that is available for more people to live. And also even more critical than food is going to be water, clean water, because contaminated water will get us back into death. Okay, so all those factors put together, bottom line is in the past 500 years, more or less, this is shooting up exponentially. All right. But we don't know when it's going to plateau. But when it starts plateauing, it's kind of drastic because we're saying that for whatever reasons, natural or artificial, the population is going to start stabilizing. Okay. Christina.
Well, the question that I have related is, so this was in Europe, but the Middle Age is already what, the 1200s? And,
Yeah.
but America was discovering 400, oh, it was before the
Yes.
discovery of America. Now I realize, okay, because I was thinking that maybe that contribute to the explosion of population.
Right.
After, okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I was, okay.
Some of
thank-
this will also challenge us to restructure some basic concepts that we have had for decades, simply because we grew up with them in the Western world, okay? But you said naively the discovery of America, but when the Europeans got here, there were all the people here already. So America as such, as the northern plate, right, the North America plate geologically and geographically had already been discovered by the Native Americans who were here thousands of years. It's estimated about 10 to 12,000 years ago, more or less, through the Bering Straits. And now there's some data that's maybe push it back even further, maybe 15,000 years ago, 15,000 already. The North American plate geographically had already been populated. So it had been obviously discovered, all right? So the more recent discovery and colonization with more or less modern tools came about 500 years ago. North and South plates, North America and South American plates, right? But there were already people here and there had been replacement and expansion and so forth. There were a lot of pioneer territories that had to be colonized, but under different conditions. In general, less tools and tools that were more organic and didn't last as long. For example, didn't last like a sword or a spear or something like that was made out of metal. Okay, so the metal was a big contribution to colonization and civilization and urbanization and all those things that we are very familiar with because we are urbanites and we live in a very artificial environment. And that's where we're at here. But yeah, so the more recent colonization of the North American and the South American plate. Now, I want to look at density, population density, which is a combination of two numbers, right? Density is a fraction, which can be translated into a percentage or a decimal. But we stay with the fraction, which is number of individuals pairs. What's the denominator?
100.
Number of individuals. When we talk about population density, it has to be number of individuals per area. And the standard area is going to be either square miles in the British system or, excuse me, square kilometers in the international system of the metric system, right? So either square miles or square kilometers. That is the surface, that is population density. So we can say 10 individuals per square mile. What's your intuition? 10 individuals per square mile. Is that high density or low density? 10 people per square mile.
I would say it's high.
That's high density in a square mile. In a square mile, you got 10 individuals in there. How often are they going to meet? If they're spread out uniformly,
No, okay,
they're far
it's
apart.
low.
It's low density.
Low. Yeah.
If I say 1,000 people in a square mile, or 1 million people in a square mile.
Oh, that would be
megalopoly.
terrible. Terrible.
the intuition is very high density, right? Super high density. So that's basically the difference between rural and urban. In rural, you know, you have a lot of room until the cows come home. You have a lot of pasture. People are spread out. In urban areas, people are on top of each other, literally, in condominiums, in buildings, in hotels, in office buildings, literally on top of each other. So the same square footage is taken up by hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, right? Like in the case of the towers. So it's dramatic. And this is the dramatic map of the human population density. Excuse me. Here's a scale. It's hard to see, but the gray is less than 2 people per square kilometer. The gray. You can see that a significant territory of the world is gray. For example, all of the northern plate, the North American plate of what is essentially Canada and Alaska, and Greenland, which is a huge ice block, but it's land underneath. Most of that, it's very low density, extremely low density, less than 2 individuals per square kilometer. And also a big chunk of Siberia, which belongs to Russia. All right. And the other big chunk of Siberia is less than 2 to 10 individuals per square kilometers. So again, 10 individuals per square kilometer is nothing. You know, they'll seldom meet. All right. So you can see that basically Siberia and Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Norway, what is it? Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, right? Very low population density. The northern swath of the northern hemisphere is equator. What's this in Africa, in northern Africa, which, by the way, most of Africa, I'll get to that. What's this? Sahara Desert, right? And then the edge of it is called the Sahel, which is turning into desert. So the Sahara Desert is expanding north and south. In some regions, it has already reached the coast of the Mediterranean. 0 people in there, or less than 2 per square kilometer. The Sahel is the boundary. Here, yeah, in a more tropical area, because the intuition is here you actually have more water available for people, right? But in Europe, it's just a little sliver. I mean, in the Mediterranean, Africa. Anyway, this is the Sahara Desert, very low population density. In contrast to that, these 2 other gray areas of South America and Australia, well, Australia is similar to Africa. What's in the middle of Australia? A huge desert, huge desert. Australia in the center, this is very typical of islands. Actually, Australia is such a large island, it's considered a continent, politically speaking, but it's very typical of islands that they'll have vegetation and therefore, excuse me, life around the edge, around the coastline, but in the center, they tend to be very dry. And that's the case with Australia. And this one is the opposite with regards to water, but the effect is the same. What's this gray area here in the South American plate? The rainforest of Amazon, what is called the Amazon Basin. And that line that you see, that wiggle line, that's the Amazon River with all its tributaries. Here's the Andes, which is a continuation of the Rockies. And all that water runs down, the snow melt runs down into the Amazon Basin, which is very flat, out into the Atlantic. And the Amazon Basin, because it's basically a swampy area, very little population. Also, a lot of nasty mosquitoes in there, like yellow fever and so forth. So, low population densities. You notice that the highest population densities in the world, let's go to the other extreme, are the eastern seaboard of the US and the west coast a little bit, Mesoamerica, Central America, the 2 coasts, the Andes on the Pacific side, right? That's Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Chile is down here. Then the eastern seaboard, this is mostly Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. But then, yeah, the tropical Africa, Europe, which has a population density about 10 times us, 10 times about, I think, our population density is, I think, about 600 persons per square kilometer. Europe is about 60 persons per square kilometer. So Europe in general has 10 times the population density that we do. In other words, more dense, less free area. So their forests are very coveted. Their open areas are very, very coveted and super protected. But even the most populated areas of the world, as we can see from this map, India, the subcontinent plate of India, most high population density, and Southeast China, Southeast Asia, I'm including Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and Southeast Asia here. All right. So these are the two highest population densities of the world. Big contrast. Okay, so when we look at global population density, which is an artificial number, right? Because we're not evenly distributed throughout the world. When we look at global population density, I crunched the numbers. I took the 8 billion, divided it into the number of kilometers of land, right? The land kilometers on Earth, or the first number, that's why I call it theoretical. This number, population density, 52 persons per square kilometer. This square kilometer is just the surface of the Earth. But the surface of the Earth also includes water, on which we're not living on a regular basis, okay? So bottom line, no, sorry, take it back, backtrack. This is only land. It's not fair to put the oceans there. This is land. I took the land mass of Earth, and divided it into the 8 billion that we are. And I came up with about 50 persons per square kilometer on the land mass. However, I am calling that theoretic. Why? Because when we look at this map again, we see a lot of land mass that is not available for life, for human life, because it is a very harsh environment. Typically the northern swath of North America and Greenland and Siberia, and then these few pockets of the Sahara and Australia and the Congo and the Amazon basin. When we add all that up, believe it or not, when we add that up, it's about 50% of the land mass on Earth, about 50%. So 50% of the land mass on Earth currently is uninhabitable by humans. So we have to double the population density. So the realistic number, the more realistic number is 104, or about 100 people per square kilometer. All right, we'll make the actual number of land, of habitable land on Earth, and that's shown here by mostly the orange, red, and purple colors. Okay, so but keeping that theoretical number for now, if we go to St. Thomas University, our little green acres here. All right, so I said that is 5 blocks by 5 blocks. When we translate that into the decimal system, it's about each one of these bars, these colored bars, is 100 meters to scale. Here's 100 meters. Here's the bar. Okay, this is just a Google photograph. So we got 7 by 8 of these bars. So 700 by 800 approximately would be under a square kilometer. You know, if it were a square kilometer, it would have to be 1,000 by 1,000 meters, right? So when we put the population density, the theoretical of 52 people per square kilometer, we have about half a square kilometer. So it's about 29 people. It's a little less than, it's a little over half. So it'd be about 29 people. If we put, what I'm trying to say by this graph is, if we put the population, the theoretical population density of the world of 52 people per square kilometer into our campus of St. Thomas University, we would have about 29 people. And spread out randomly at a more or less even distance randomly, all right? It would look like this, the little red figures in our campus, kind of spread out. All right, low density, I would say relatively low density, just by the eye. But like I pointed out, about 50% of land is uninhabitable, and therefore the other 50 is habitable. And so the more realistic number is 100 people per square kilometer, and therefore we would double the population from about 59 or 58, it would be 29 point something, so about almost 60 individuals. It would look like this. So when you compare this one to this one, you can see double the population. Now it's starting to get dense just by doubling the population. Right? So compare that to that thing. Okay, it's starting to get dense. That is the realistic population density of the world today, just put into our campus. Of course, the actual size of a human being is not that big. This would be giants walking on our campus, right? But just to give you a graphic representation of human population density and the fact that, you know, we're here, we don't have a grip on what this means yet with regards to population density. But then the other thing we notice, again, going back to here, is that we're not evenly distributed throughout the 50% of habitable land. Notice the statement. Humans are not evenly distributed within the habitable space on Earth, within that 50% of habitable land. We're not evenly distributed. Here is a very graphic explanation of that. We have areas of very low density, and we have areas of very high density, okay? Low density, the Midwest in the US, high density, the two coasts, including Florida. Look at Florida, okay? Why? Because of the weather, except on a hurricane. All right, so you see, high density, low density, average density, middle density, we're not evenly distributed. Right? So when we talk about population density and population growth and the overpopulation, the supposed overpopulation of the world, right? The overpopulation, which is an argument that some ecologists are making, that we're just too many people on Earth. But we're not too many people all over the Earth. In fact, for those of you who have traveled on a plane and have looked out the window during daytime travel, when you look out the window of a plane, what do you see underneath? We see mostly green. We see mostly uninhabited land. I'm talking about land, not the ocean. When we travel on a plane, look at the window, underneath we see mostly uninhabited land. Some of it is agricultural, yes. But a lot of it is just open land, open green space. It could be mountains, it could be plains, it could be savanna, it could be forest, you know, but it's open green space. And every now and then we go over an urban area that we see, okay? There are those maps, those photographs, satellite photographs of Earth, night, satellite, Earth, photo, right. Okay, so these are photos of Earth. This is not a painting. All right, this is an actual photo. There we go. It's an actual photo. All right. And this is telling us population density. But it's a skewed population density because a zebra is not going to light up a bulb, right? And a lizard is not driving a car at night. And so this is population density, human population density. But it's deceptive because this is what kind of light? These are not fires, these are artificial light, artificial or whatever, electricity light, right? They convert it to light. So this is the urban areas that have electricity. A lot of Africa doesn't have electricity. So we add on top of this a fire, right? There's another one. Human, let's see, fire, night, satellite, Earth photo. Because the contrast has been done, the counterpart of the fire. Come on. Did I do image? Yeah. It tells a very different story. I'm not seeing it, but what comes up mostly is Africa of fires. Here's one, South America. All right, well, I guess we'll have to go. Yeah, okay, well, this is South America, and you can see that it's mostly the Aboriginal regions, the hunter-gatherers, the Yanomami and the Amazon basin around, you know, the fires at night that they use for their own lighting, for their own light and food, for their own, cooking. All right, here's a palo, white light, but reddish are the fires. Anyway, there's one that is, I don't see it now, it's very famous. Okay, well, here's one that has, this is what would look. Okay, here we go. This is the one. Africa and South America, places where they have less technology available. Anyway, so we'd have to add that. My point about all this is that where we have high density is what we call megalopolis, all right? And the definition of a megalopoly is a city that has more than 10 million people living within it. More than 10 million people. And I can tell you, I haven't taken the time to track this and to make a graph out of it, but a few decades ago, there were very few cities. There were only, I'm going to throw just numbers out there. Let's say 40 years ago. Let me take it back. In the 1960s, I was living in Mexico City as a teenager. So that's 40 years ago. 40 years ago, Mexico was one of the few megalopolis of the world. They had reached 10 million people. I remember for the 68 Olympics in Mexico City, all right? Very few cities of the world were 10 million people or more 40 years ago. Today, there are 45 cities in the world that are megalopolis. Okay, so that is also an exponential growth. If you want to, you can propose that as a project. For example, here's one project that some of you can propose for statistics to figure out the association or potential correlation between human population growth and the growth of megalopolis on Earth. So you have to go back in time and figure out how many cities were 10 million people or more. You can start maybe 50 years ago, and you get 1, 2, 3 cities, and then move it up year by year, you know, over 50-year time. How many more cities come up to be megalopolis, right? The definition is 10 million people or more living in the same metropolitan urban area. That number is going to increase, but it's not going to increase linear. It's going to increase exponential. And if it increases exponential, then the statistical analysis would be how does it associate with human population growth with this sigmoid curve, right? Does it correlate? And I mean, the intuition is that it does, right? Is it by coincidence or is it by, design? That's the point. So the megalopolis, in my opinion, this is where the issue is. In this megalopolis, because, the more population density you have, by definition, the less green area that you have, because all area, they call it what they call New York, the concrete jungle, right? Because it's high density, but of buildings, not of trees. And you have this little tiny lawn, which is not this one. This is what is this called in New York, Manhattan, the top part, the lower Battery Place or something like that. But in here, somewhere buried is what? Central Park, the little sliver of Central Park in New York, right? It's in there and they protect it like crazy. We lived in New York also when I was a kid, and Central Park was 3 blocks away from us. So that was our backyard, that was our playground. It's the green space of the whole megalopoly, and so on and so forth. Tokyo, Yokohama, I think is one of the biggest, I think 25 million or something like that, I don't know. Beijing, Mumbai, which used to be called Bombay in India. And yes, you can see the smog in the background, of course, because it correlates, right? This is the Mount Fuji in Japan, Tokyo in Japan. All right, so 45 of these megalopolis and growing. So this is where the problem, what do you think is more crime in the US? In the Midwest or in New York City?
Chicago.
LA, Chicago, right? Right, high density cities is where you have the more, because the infrastructure, imagine providing fresh water, clean water, drinking water for these megalopolis. What do you do with the waste, with the urban waste, with garbage, right? Artificial and organic garbage. What do you do with it? The sewer system and so forth. I hear that the water in New York City has been recycled about 5 or 6 times before they finally empty out into the ocean. So you know what you're drinking in New York City, and it's still drinkable water. That's amazing technology, right? But kind of scary, because if that technology fails, how many million people are going to get contaminated with E. coli, etc. So megalopolis, in my opinion, are the big problem. All right, that's where you have the most crime, the most challenges for infrastructure, transportation, so public transport, so the amount of CO2 that comes out this way. Then there's regulation, yeah, but then there's corruption, because the regulation doesn't get implemented. There may not be laws, but they, if there are laws, they're not implemented because of corruption. And the end result, one way or another, is contamination, is pollution, smog, etc., etc. And that happens in the megalopolis, which are increasing in number, but there's still a lot of open space in the world, and that's what we need to protect. I'll end up with this slide, and I know I ran over the break, but I'm kind of cutting close early here, because I need to regroup with our the new students. Okay, so what do we have? In the year 2000, the United Nations, which I think may be around here, the UN building, one of these anyway, started this plan, right? They had the Millennium Summit, the UN Millennium Summit. That was in the year 2000. Yes, I know I misspelled it. There's the UN building, Hudson River, okay? And so this was in the year 2000, as you can see, right? And the development goals, these were very ambitious. This summit led to the development of these goals with a timeline. You can read into it. 189 signatories, countries out of about 200 countries of the world. So practically every country of the world made the Millennium Declaration, and they essentially committed to these 8 goals here. all right, to be conquered by 2015, extremely ambitious. In 15 years, these nations, I have 150 here, it's actually 180 something, plus NGO. What is NGO? So yes, we have to consider there are like two categories of members for the United Nations. Keep in mind the United Nations came out of the Second World War to try to end all wars and not have another war, right? To the collaboration of nations. It started first as a League of Nations, and then that was transformed into the United Nations. So now we have over 150 nations, close to actually 200, 190 something. And NGOs is the other category. NGOs are non-governmental organizations. I think these are probably in the thousands now, but NGOs are interest groups. And
Father,
it's, hold on. Interest groups are, it could be, you know, a group of ecologists, or a group of environmentalists, a lot of environmentalists, a group of women that are promoting women's issues, a group of economists, etc. So they form an interest group, and it's called a non-governmental organization. Typically, they are C3 companies or 3C corporations, meaning nonprofits, and they join the United Nations, and they have voting rights, and they have a voice and vote and so forth, so they participate. These are the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, all right? And there are many of them. That's why it's kind of unwieldy when the UN has a General Assembly to herd everybody together to a common cause. But in the year 2000, those nations, those members were herded together to a common cause, and these were the 8 common cause to eradicate by the year 2015. So in 15 years, a human generation is considered to be about 20 years. So in less than one human generation, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Well, extreme, yes, eradicate extreme poverty. Promote gender equality and empower women. Improve maternal health. This is global, throughout the world. Ensure environmental sustainability. Achieve universal primary education. In other words, elementary school. Reduce child mortality. Combat HIV and AIDS, which was an epidemic back at that time, malaria and other diseases, especially epidemics. Global partnership for development. In other words, you know, a common cause. Let's do it together. Extremely ambitious, right? Those were the 8 goals for the Millennium Summit, and extremely ambitious to be accomplished in 15 years. Well, 2015 came and went, and some of these moved forward, but not all of it, okay? Some of it did go forward, some of it went backwards.
and
one
then the
particular that did-
pandemic.
And so the HIV/AIDS pandemic was reduced precisely because of the cocktails, not much of the behavior, but the cocktails that are made now, the medical drug cocktails, medication. But we replaced it with another pandemic, COVID, which to this day is controversial whether the virus was manufactured or not. That's going to be another lecture for all of you. Okay. But we thought we were coming out of it in 2018 and 2019, and boom, we got hit with another epidemic. Anyway, very ambitious goals. 2015 came and went. None of these fully achieved, of course. So now there was a second summit, and they expanded the goals to 17 to be achieved by 2030. almost more than double the goals, which are no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, renewable energy, good jobs and economic growth, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities like megalopolis, responsible consumption, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice, and again, partnership for the goals to get it all done. In other words, heaven on earth, nirvana by 2030, here it comes. We're now 8 years away from this goal. Please, we need the UN to get a little more realistic. Okay, these are super ambitious, they're goals, right? They're ambitious, but we're still at baby steps. And we're nowhere near any one of these 17. Well, we got to make some progress. And one progress that I would say, I'll kind of end with this, is that I see an increase in awareness, at least for the environment, you know, but there is also in certain sectors an increase in unawareness for the dignity and the sanctity of people, of human life. And so we have to balance because we have to live somewhere. So one species has to figure it out. The one species has to figure out how to keep all the other species alive so that we can stay alive. These are the challenges. And like I say, in the business world, these challenges we need to turn into opportunities. Okay. Okay, that's the end. I know I went through the break, but we're going to end early. Questions, comments?
Just one
Christina.
comment. What I heard, and I read very few articles, not a lot, that the pandemic has put the world like 20 years behind or what was accomplished after the pandemic. Is it that in some places, like for instance, I'm talking about Colombia, what they're saying that the level of poverty because of the pandemic it's going to take at least 20 more years to go back to what it was before the pandemic.
Yeah, right. So it's a very big question or statement, if you will, and it's obviously a very open question. The bottom answer is, I would say, it depends. It depends on the region. It depends on what we're focusing on, right? It depends on the population living there. It depends on the technology that's available. So I can tell you, for example, with regards to CO2, we're going to see, I'm going to use this graph as an example. This dip here was because of the Black Plague, right? We're going to see a similar dip in the CO2 content in 2019, 2020, especially 2019. We're going to see a dip in CO2 temporarily. Why? Because of the shutdowns. So there were massive shutdowns done in areas of the world that have megalopolies and that contaminate a lot, like Beijing, like some nations, some countries of Asia and India, where the shutdown stopped private and public transportation, so there was no CO2 produced, or very little CO2 produced, with people locked down. So we're going to see a dip in the CO2. And all of a sudden in Beijing, there was clean air and people could see, for miles for the first time. And so that you can say that was an environmental positive, temporarily, of course, now, but they're still in some places of China, they're still in lockdown back and forth because they're still having breakouts. Okay. So it depends. It depends on what we look at. In general, globally, it's like everything else. The populations with greater means did better. The populations with lesser means did worse and got set back. Now we have another level of complexity. The economy of the world has been intertwined, right? Most of the things that we have here in the US, whatever it is, you look at it, it will gonna say made in China, okay? But now there's the trade wars going on, and there's also the production, what is that called? The production line, the chain, production chain. Some of the links are missing, and there's back orders on stuff. You order a screw for a machine, and it's on back order. And sit and wait for months for the little screw to arrive, and you cannot run the machine until you get that little screw. So, it's affected. We've been affected by it in many, many ways. Of course, I could do without the deosterizer. I could do without the blender in the kitchen. I simply stir the eggs. I beat the eggs by with a fork instead of using the blender, you know? But when we talk about life support systems, that's a different story, right? And so it depends, Globally, we can say people have more access to technology or to wealth or well-being. People have less access to well-being. Who are going to be most impacted? Obviously, the people who have less access. 50% of the population of the world, of the 8 billion, goes to bed hungry every day. And an equivalent amount don't have clean water coming out of the tap, you know, don't even have a tap to tap into for water, for clean water. So these are dramatic issues. That's why you see our Pope Francis, for some people, seem radical, but he's in tune with those poor people of the world, with the suffering people of the world. And so he's raising that issue, and he's not becoming popular in many places because of that, but he's very popular in other places because of that. So these are the challenges. We got to turn these challenges into opportunity. It all comes down to the conscience, you know, how we are eco-friendly, how we help each other to not only survive, but to thrive. These are the challenges. These are the challenges. And yet I will say that the market economy, in my opinion, I'm not an economist by far, but in my opinion, the market economy is the best, you know, as in contrast to a centralized economy by the government. That's tyranny, and that's what communism tries to do. I lost my country for that, Cuba. And that's going to chaos. On the other hand, unrestricted capitalism, just dog eat dog of just the bottom line, the dollar as the only standard, is also unacceptable. So we have to put in regulation, and then we end up with what we call a mixed economy. Whether it's government regulation, yes, you want to have an industry, you want to build tires, fantastic, build tires. But the CO2 that is coming out of your plume, out of your factory, you got to clean up that CO2. You can build all the tires you want, you know, but the rubber, when you melt the rubber and it's going to be CO2 production, you got to clean that. You got to put a filter, you got to put a charcoal filter on that factory so that you don't contaminate the hotel or the apartment building that lives next to you. Okay, because they have a right to clean air. And so we have to put in regulations. So now the tire is going to cost more money because you have to add in the factor of the charcoal filters, right? And it's a market economy, but it's got to be regulated. And the regulation has to go in place, because if I get corrupt and get paid off and don't enforce the regulation, then we're back to contamination. Okay, open questions, challenging issues. I hope you see the bioethics in it, and that's what we're trying to look at. Okay, folks, anything else? All right, I hear are done, so I'm going to close the recording, but please stay on. If I don't know if Crystal or Sarah are on, but I need the four of you. Kenny, do you mind texting Sarah to get on at least by phone somehow so that we can